Ah!
I can't wait to talk about the history.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys, here we go.
I am so excited to talk about history with my friends today.
Oh my gosh, my friends are here.
My friends are going to talk about it. I looked up a topic, and then I researched the topic, and then I got some talking points about the topic, and I wrote them down in my notebook.
Guys, I learned something today.
Just like my mom showed me.
Guys, I can read.
Shut up.
All right. Welcome back to the Good Year podcast, my friends. If this is your first time
Cheers.
joining us, this is
Yeah.
a podcast in which...
1 year anniversary.
Yeah. Five.
Cheers again.
Cheers.
All right, here's to 5 more years.
5 more
Five.
episodes.
No.
5 more. Yeah. 5 more years. 5 more episodes.
This is a show in which we use a random number generator to pick a random year in history. And then we go off for X amount of time and research it, and then we share stories with each other. Last time we picked the year, our first negative number
Of negative 1619. And so that brings us to 1619 BC. So those are stories we're going to be sharing with...
Stands for banana crust. right?
Banana crust is the historical
Should I
way
put
to
this
say
on,
it.
right?
Yeah, you could... Oh, but it will
That's
throw
the
off your
academic.
hat.
That's the academic.
Yeah. I like that. Good?
No.
No?
He's close.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah.
So good.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
And we're back. I have stories. You have stories. We didn't decide who was going to start off. So, since Zach is clapping, he is going to start us off this week.
No. Who is this guy?
16, 19,
Oh, the year was 17, 16, 19.
16, 16, 19, 16, 19, 16, 19, 16, 19, 16, 19, 16, 19, 16, 19. Okay. Yeah.
I still don't support the song,
That
so...
was real
Well,
lame.
that's because you're not
Are
fun.
you a magician?
No, I'm not.
Are you a magician and a musician combined?
No. You didn't even try.
Yeah.
Let's.
No,
Let's
done
get a
done
little-
with the song.
No.
I hate songs.
Come on. Well,
I hate songs. I hate singing. I hate music.
come on. You like.
Whoa, where
I know
did this
what.
come from?
Hey, whoa! You just put on a bunch of great songs for us before the show started.
I did, but they were not my making, so...
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think to get this show rolling, I'll just tell us.
We need to sing a song. So
what?
let's.
No, stop.
What should we
Fuck
do?
your song, and fuck you for wanting the song.
16,
No.
19, BC is the year.
19.
16, 19, BC is the time of year. That was perfect.
Great.
That was
There we
great.
go.
You,
That was good.
you nailed it. Sean coming in with the falsetto right there. No one expected it.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. I know you loved it.
John, you've got stories about. I don't remember what you told me about. Zach's got stories about the bow. I've got stories about China.
The bow.
That's all I was told.
That's about how general it is.
You
when
said I'm going to do a recap on the bow.
I'd like to lead us in a seminar on
So maybe
the bow.
Maybe-
Well, that's how general it is when you're researching 1619 on the internet.
right.
In
Yeah.
It's just
I mean,
like-
for context, 1619 BC is, if you didn't know, a long time ago.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
And
It's
It was a long time ago.
I mean, so
it's not even the Iron Age, which is one of the interesting things to me, is that like trying to imagine this world in which they haven't even figured out how to work with iron. It's the Bronze Age, so all their armor is like bronze, and which is after the Stone Age. For context, we go Stone Age, Bronze
Yeah.
Age.
It's like the first metal that humans figured out how to work. It's like, right? Is
Yeah.
that true, Sean?
It's copper.
Oh, there was a
And
copper
then-
age also?
It's
I
not
don't
an
know.
official age.
It's just
Right.
like they were
Egyptian farmers were like, we have copper ingots. Let's make some little farm tools out of them. And then they did, and they're like, wow, this is better than a stick.
Yeah.
And then the Bronze Age was way better. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're like, oh, this is.
When they were using their stone hoe, it was just so heavy that they
So
were
what is
fucking up.
so what is bronze then?
It's copper and zinc.
It's copper and zinc
Yeah.
melted together.
Yeah, so they had to plan it out too. They had to be like, all right, I want to make a furnace or a foundry and melt these two things together and make another element. They
So
weren't
how
like,
how did they figure that out though? Was it simply like what facilitated the Bronze Age? Was it simply a matter of getting your forge hot enough to melt those things?
yeah, people speculated that during that time, people would have big bonfires and then like dance around and do their fucking
Oh, and then like
Weird-
throw stuff in
weird,
it and it would
weird
melt.
shit
Yeah.
where like they do their rituals and throw shit in because copper turns fire green. And they'd be like, ooh. So people think that that's how they made bronze by accident because it copper and then the zinc mixed in.
People were
But-
just chucking metal into the fire, seeing
Yeah.
what if
Yeah.
it would make cooler colors.
But that's hard to prove because to melt those two materials into bronze takes a temperature so high that most fires that you just make it like a fireplace isn't hot enough to do it. So they're like, we think that they actually like planned it out ahead of time or something. Like someone fucking just thought of some idea.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, and it kind of ties into what I'm going to talk about. Is maybe just because I think about it a lot whenever I read ancient history, is just the like. There's almost an implicit underestimation of ancient people, like in academia, of just like, oh yeah, they accidentally discovered how to smelt metal, and like you said, that's probably not possible, right? Because no one's campfire was hot enough to smelt metals.
Yeah, most likely.
So they were probably experimenting, and they probably had their own scientific method of like, oh, we could probably do something with this, you know. But yeah, that's sort of the broad context of what I was looking at, because I looked at a sort of broad development of weapons technology, and when you read about it, it's just like, wow, these people were just as smart as modern people, but just dealing with limited tools, basically. Like, I think I was looking at a timeline, and I think the first organized military was the Sumerians. They had a professional standing army, evidence suggests, in like 3500 BC, which is with like with like they would like pay their soldiers, and like by organized I mean like really organized. They had regiments and battle lines, and soldiers were paid, and like the logistics behind maintaining, I think it was, they suggest maybe about 1,000 men like on call to do anything. It was like pretty impressive for a society that hasn't figured out metalworking yet, you know?
Right.
Like, so yeah, so it is pretty interesting looking at these topics and trying to think, like, I always think of that theory that is just like, you know, our brains haven't really changed that much. Like, these people weren't stupid. They were just like working with a different array of stuff,
right.
you know? So
Bill the blacksmith is like, man, if I could have these tools here, I could have built that suit of armor you wanted, but I don't have it.
yeah, all I got is
got, like, a-
sticks and mud.
Here's
Like,
some
if
wood
I have this
armor.
here, I drew it in the sand for you too, but that's all I need.
I don't
but
have any paper. I wish I could make a blueprint for you, but
It's funny, you always think about yourself going
I
back
bl-
in time and being like the best guy ever, and you're like, why don't you just have swords? And they're like, well, how do you make it? And you're like, I don't know, you just have metal. And they're like, where do we get metal? And you're like, I don't know anything about enough.
if you went back into ancient Egypt or something, you'd just be like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna farm dirt now.
Yeah, you can imagine just trying to like drill a hole. You can spend your whole life trying to figure out how to drill a fucking hole. I don't have anything to do this. I have a stick, and I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
My family's been trying to dig a well for 100 years.
Like, what'd you use? Well, we got a couple bones, and we
This-
made them into sticks.
And we
then
sharpened them on some rocks. And you know, it's definitely more efficient than using your hands, for sure.
Yeah.
And then this fucker came back in a time machine like he was going to fix everything, and he
And
couldn't,
he couldn't
do
even start a fire.
he didn't even know. He was like, "Where do you plug your phone in?"
Yeah.
And we're
Fuck, I didn't
We were
bring
like-
my notes.
yeah.
You show up with like a giant book for dummies. And you're just like,
You come back like, "Have you heard of the internet,
Yeah.
losers?" And
shit, I should have. You go back and you show up. You're like, "Can I go again? I forgot everything."
they're like,
I
"No,
needed
you can
to
only go
survive."
once." Yeah.
So Sean, what did you do? Just very briefly, just to remind me and the audience.
Our audience, yes.
Yeah, your general.
I looked
What was your general
extensively at bull leaping.
concept? Bull leaping.
Bull leaping.
Bull leaping.
It was a sport.
Oh, okay.
And then I looked into the history of that, which made me read about the Mycenaean and the Minoan empires.
How about we start with Zach talking broadly about weapons, and then that'll maybe get us into talking broadly about this, about your topic, and then I have just like a kind of very specific short story, and I think that'll play out nicely.
What is your story?
So mine's.
Introduce your topic, because I need to go look at the thing.
You need to go look. Oh,
Yeah. Introduce your topic.
You know, sometimes
in the
people.
middle of something.
It's like show must go on, you know.
Yeah, I know. It's like we could do this without him, and what a joy it would be.
It's 2 seconds.
It would be
asshole.
just
Wow, that
one-
was
we were just filling
unbearable.
time by talking shit, which
Yeah.
is all we could do.
Or you could have just introduced your topic and focus and had the cut be on you.
Didn't want to.
Well,
You expect
that's-
too much from us, Zach.
My rage
Well, you're
boiled up
you're
to a point a little bit too much to
what
handle.
rage? You're supposed to. You're pretending to be a director, and
Oh, I'm sweating.
and yet you.
No.
And yet you have no interest in editing or being flexible with.
Oh,
with
here
your
it,
takes.
it comes out. It
Wow.
comes out on live.
Wow.
All right, let's start with an arm wrestle to settle this.
All right.
I want to duel you.
Like with guns or with,
With swords.
Okay.
All right, well, give me a couple weeks.
Yeah,
and build you up some nice rapios.
that would feel. I feel like that would fix a lot of our issues if one of us just died
Yeah, maybe.
in combat.
Yeah.
So-
I don't know what issue there is. You ruined the show by complaining about nothing.
Nah,
Yeah.
nah,
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah. Yeah. Fuck you.
nah, nah.
What are you gonna do? Listen to another podcast?
Yeah.
What are you, too good?
Yeah.
I don't even. What is a podcast really?
It's what we're doing right now.
Really?
You're a professional podcaster, Sean.
I'm on 3D.
No.
I'm a 3D. That's not 3D?
That's
no,
not
it's not 3D.
Shit.
I'm
Yeah,
on a-
Sean, come on, get it together,
I
man.
thought
You
I
know
was
what
all
we're doing. We know
special.
what we're doing here.
I thought I was a special one, but I'm
No,
not.
it's the same setup as always. My story is
The
about.
benefit of this being in 3D.
I didn't know what was going on. I thought we were
Three
going off
dudes.
track. I thought we were
Three
going way off
dudes.
track.
3 white guys get drunk around a table and pretend to know stuff
Yeah.
in 3D.
Hey, that might sell it.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, everyone in the Bulgarian Empire is coming out in droves.
Oh, the Bulgarian Empire.
That's why we don't have listeners. It's not in 3D.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
yeah.
History podcast in 3D.
We should just market it as in 3D.
we should just
The audio podcast in 3D.
3D audio.
We should do virtual reality so people can like virtually stand next to us.
Sit on our laps.
And then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just put an Oculus in between all of our legs.
Uh-huh.
What's an Oculus?
Come on, Sean, you know what we're doing here. You know
Don't
what
make me
that is.
explain
Don't
my
make
thing.
me-
I don't
come
know
on,
what I'm
come on,
talking
come on.
about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
No, it's
move
a-
on to your.
Yep. So start us off. So
Get
you're,
all
you're-
snappy
You're
with it.
generally talking about weaponry in this era. This is like
What a great thing that I want.
3,500 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like, what is the main weaponry of the time? Is that what you're going to be talking about?
no. Well, so what I'm going to be talking about is the composite bow being used in conjunction with chariots, which happened in the 17th century, but wasn't widely used.
BC.
BC. It wasn't widely used until our kind of era, the 1600s. And
Good use of toys there.
yeah, well, and it's been by historians who study this stuff. It's been kind of compared to this revolution in weapons technology akin to the discovery of gunpowder, and it was kind of like, and the atomic bomb. It was like the atomic bomb of its day in some way, in that it really led to a lot of geopolitical upheaval and facilitated an arms race effectively between all the powers that knew about it.
Trying to get the technology of chariot and bow.
Exactly.
I mean, it must have been. You must have thought of those people as just giant cowards, being like, "Come face me," and they're like, "Nope," and they're just riding in circles around the
shooting
just
you.
like fuck, and
Yeah.
just like getting nailed.
You know, what I wish I had looked at, and maybe Sean just might know more about this because he knows about, those things, is
I
I
have
don't
some
know what the
things.
predominant weapons were prior to that, really. Like, were they using cavalry at all? Or was it just was it just spear combat, basically?
Well, there's actually
And
ancient.
slingers.
There's ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs that show people learning how to ride horses, and people rode them backwards and like far on the
Yeah,
ass
they-
of the horse.
they didn't know how
and,
to
like,
ride 'em.
really close to the neck, and like all this goofy shit because there was a group of people in like a guild pretty much who like had the secrets of taking care of and riding horses.
Mhm.
And so there was a cavalry, I would think, but it would have been like
You-
royalty, and
Yeah.
it would have been such a new thing at the time.
So what was the predominant, like, battle was pretty much just like close combat, like blunt objects and or swords
Yeah,
and
short
spears.
swords because
Yeah.
they couldn't make anything very long out of bronze or copper.
Oh, because it doesn't have the strength to.
Yeah, I mean they just didn't have the technology either
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
And they had small axes too. And they had bows for. I mean, there's been bows for like 30,000 years. It's just that they were shitty.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then the
I
composite bow.
I
was
actually
great.
found out that that bows themselves, like missile weapons that used the tension of, a bow and a string to launch a missile using that stored energy, originate. Fasten, hold on to your hats. 64,000 years ago.
Okay, yeah, that's
Whoa.
double of what I thought.
Holy
That's
cow.
that's like the beginning of time old.
Huh.
64,000 years.
Yeah.
They've dated bows that they found in Africa.
Whoa.
So these are old ass weapons. Missile weapons are old. But composite bows, which are pretty much, I mean, maybe aside from the English longbow, like the most effective. Like, I mean, the Mongols conquered the whole world with composite bows.
Can you tell me what a composite bow is different than a non-composite bow?
I don't know enough about bows, but imagine the Mongol bow, basically. It's kind of small, and it's got that curved shape. It's basically like, it basically just has a really tight curve, and I think, and it's used effectively like on horseback, right? Like it's a horse riding bow. And the first composite bows are speculated to have been made by Asiatic steppe people, like the predecessors of the Mongols, 10,000 years ago, and just used by those steppe tribes. And then eventually through contact with people in Asia Minor, like Eurasian people and like Indo-Aryan people, they adopted the bows, or like got them or learned how to make them. So it spread this technology takes hundreds of years to spread, between places, because everything's so regionalized also in this time. There's not really a global exchange of ideas happening. Really before like Alexander the Great, which is way ahead of this, 1,300 years after this. So so the composite bow comes from the steppe people.
Yeah,
And
that the bow, if you want like a more detailed explanation of the bow,
yeah, please.
it's so like the Mongolian bow was a composite bow, and when you hold it without the string on it, this is pointing towards the front. It's like a big C.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you put the
and you
string on
pull
it,
it
you're
around.
pulling that C towards you.
I see.
And then when you get the string on, it has all that stored strength,
Uh-huh.
so that when you do use the bow, it's like probably more than twice as powerful than
Yeah.
if it was just straight.
Rather than
And it's
just one
from
straight piece.
oh,
I
so
see.
the stick is like this, and then you bend that
Yeah.
C all
Yeah.
the way around.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
why it looks like that.
another. I think I'm not 100% sure if a composite bow is the exact same thing as a recurve bow, but that's how a recurve bow also works.
Well, I think a composite bow. Again, I wish that I had looked deeper into this, but I figured our resident arms expert would know enough to fill in the gaps. Is
Yeah, that's
my-
the
my-
most important thing.
my
And-
understanding is the composite is different from the recurve because it's 2 or maybe more actual layers of wood laminated together. So at some point, 6,000 years ago, some like proto-Mongolian person figured out how to laminate shit, which is pretty cool. Whatever that means. Maybe they just they figured out how to make some kind of epoxy and put layers of wood together, which strengthened it and made it able to hold essentially more energy in its curve. So it's a pretty impressive weapon, and it is the pinnacle of missile technology in our year. So the big breakthrough is that the Mesopotamians around the 1700s figure out how to combine this composite bow with chariots. Now, chariots had already existed. The Sumerians had invented chariots, but they didn't have a lot of the things that we think of. They weren't like these Ben-Hur Greco-Egyptian chariots. They were called war wagons, and I don't really know what they did. There's evidence of them in inscriptions, and historians have looked at it and been like, yeah, I guess those are chariots.
Yeah.
But they're pulled by donkeys or oxen, and
So they're not fast.
they're not fast. They're big fucking heavy wagons, and also they're using primitive stone or wood wheels, not spoked wheels.
Stone wheels.
So so they're really heavy, and I don't really know what they do. They're just but they're used in sieges. Maybe they might even just be troop transports, or maybe they pull rams or something. I don't know. They've just seen pictures of them
Yeah.
being depicted in sieges. So, yeah. So they had these war wagons, and the reason that they weren't very practical, like I said, was because they were really big and they didn't have the right wheels. But one of the big things is that they didn't have the proper, and this is such a funny detail in its seeming insignificance, but it was really the missing link, right? Is because even if you have a war wagon and you're pulling it at kind of a slow pace with an ox team, you could still throw some archers up there and it would be the tank of its day, right? But it didn't have the speed to protect the archers, right? And it didn't have so they tried to figure out how to rectify that, and they wanted to attach it to horses because, like we said before, no one really knew how to ride horses. No one really knew how to use horses as cavalry. That requires almost the rider and the horse to be one thing.
They might even not been able to make good saddles or even things like
Well,
that.
this is the interesting thing. They couldn't, even when they had invented, the Mesopotamians eventually invent two-wheeled chairs. Well, first they invent spoked wheels, which takes another 1,000 years to figure out, and then, or another 100 years to figure out, let's say. And then they invent two-wheeled chariots. But the one missing thing is that they don't have proper harnesses. They haven't invented horse harnesses yet. They can't figure out how to attach it to a horse
Right.
and get it to stay on. So it takes them hundreds of years. And then finally, I forget if it's the Assyrians or it's some Mesopotamian civilization, maybe the Hittites, figure out how to attach these light spoked, more mobile war wagons to horses. And it just changes the game. They fuck
Game
everybody
changer.
over.
Sounds like a blast to be ripping around in a chariot with a bow, just taking out people.
Well, that's the thing. You have a driver, and then you have the tail gunner,
Yeah.
right? Who's just
Yeah.
like it fucked everything up.
That'd be a great movie.
Yeah, and then
Like the story of two dudes, or like it's like a buddy cop movie, but set in the ancient world. It's just
figuring
like,
out a chariot.
Two pals go on to war together. One's the driver, the other's the gunner.
It's like Top Gun for Rome.
Well, so the crazier thing is that the Iranian people, who eventually become the Persians, the Aryan people, get the really gross idea of putting scythes on the wheels so
Gross.
that they don't even need archers anymore. They just whoosh, whoosh, and run through the infantry lines and cut people's legs off with they literally put farming scythes like for wheat on the wheels.
Wow.
And it, like the cruelest weapon ever, right?
Yeah.
It's like Speed Racer, and they just not only are you running people over with your horse, but you're just chopping people up
Yeah.
with your wheels. So yeah, these things were formidable. And the two things that it facilitated, I think, geopolitically, or I would argue, is that once these Mesopotamian people figured it out, they just started conquering everybody, like, because they were just like, no one can fuck with this chariot.
Going back to that knives on wheels thing, I've seen that,
Yeah.
and it makes you think, well, that's not very practical, but maybe it was just so terrifying for the enemy to see it that they're like, oh fuck,
Yeah.
they got swords on their wheels.
That does probably do a lot, because like if your
I think
whole
that's
thing
just
is like
what they
hold
wanted.
rank.
They might have just wanted
Yeah.
to scare the shit out of them. I don't know if they actually used those.
Well, I
would
mean-
think that chariots would just flank around.
No,
in
they did
circles.
use them. They used them for 1,000 years. I mean, when Darius III was fighting Alexander the Great in 320 BC, he had a scythe chariot. He actually had thousands of scythe chariots. But by that point, they were...
It's pretty easy to
Yeah, well, by that point, people figured out how to go around them, and there's
Yeah.
actually a funny story about that that I'll save for last. But so I was telling Brian a little bit about this empire that pops up in sort of eastern Anatolia called the Mitanni Empire. And the Mitanni Empire is really mysterious. Good fodder for ancient aliens theories. Because
go on.
go on. Call up Childress, because
Are you done talking about the chariot though?
no. This is all
Because I had some info too.
about the chariots.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
No. You started your story. Keep going.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, so this is just, I think, the impact of the chariot is there's these people all throughout eastern Anatolia, if you can imagine Turkey and over by like the Caucasus Mountain kind of area,
Okay.
called Hurrian people. And the Hurrian people, are just whatever. They're like tribal people. They, live.
They're always in a rush.
Yeah, they're always
they're next to the
they're always
Hittites.
hurrying around.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Hittites are up north, and the Hurrians are, chilling. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these people called the Mitanni show up. No one knows where they came from, and what's even weirder is their language group is a language isolate, which means they have no idea. They can't even trace where they came from using their language because they have no fucking clue. Like there's no associations with any other language from that time period that we can understand. So these random people show up called the Mitanni and basically insinuate themselves as the elite ruling class of all the Hurrians somehow. Like somehow they either charismatically convince all these people, like, we're better than you, let us sit up in the palace and you give us all your stuff and we tax you. And they kind of overnight establish this giant empire rivaling Egypt and the Hittites because they just like take over these people. And my theory is that they had chariots, that they came from Mesopotamia and they were just so scary in their big scythed horse wagons that people were like, yep, those guys are in charge. They're the bosses now. So So all of a sudden, the geopolitics of that region has changed, and there's this huge empire there that Egypt now is aware of and has to think of. And then in our year, in about 1650 to 1600, so 1615 is in there somewhere, Egypt gets invaded by a people called the Hyksos, who come in, you guessed it, on chariots and destroy the 13th dynasty of Egypt. The Egyptians, who are known for chariots, didn't have that technology yet. So, like I said, there's this arms race happening, right? As they see the Mitanni, they see these Mesopotamian people fucking shit up in the north, and they're like, what's going on there? Like, a bunch of stuff just changed. And then all of a sudden, these random people, and again, we don't really know anything about them. Hyksos is an Egyptian word meaning like foreign interloper or something. These people just show up on chariots and defeat them like that and establish a whole new dynasty in Egypt. And they essentially rule northern Egypt from the imperial capital, the pharaohic capital at Memphis. And the real like remnants of the ethnic like Egyptian dynasty move down, to Thebes in the south. So they essentially rule the Nile Delta and this beautiful, bountiful land, and retain control of it for hundreds of years through these chariots. But eventually the Egyptians in the south figure out how to use chariots and war axes and all these other Hyksosian Mitanni inventions just trickle over to them. And they rebel and take back the north, and the Hyksos king flees. And it's speculated now by historians that only by being overthrown, basically, by the Hyksos, were the Egyptians able to learn how to use chariots, learn what they were even, and then go on to be the kind of golden age BC Egypt that we think of in our popular imagination, which then had an empire that stretched all the way up the Levant, through Palestine, through the Middle East, because they took these chariots and used them really well against the people who introduced it to them by invading them.
Right.
So
So
we gotta do it.
yeah. So they were fighting the Mesopotamians with their own weapons. And this comes to a head in the Battle of Kadesh, where the Egyptians face off against, I'm not sure who they were, but they were some Mesopotamian civilization, and it's the biggest chariot battle ever in history.
Wow.
Each side has like 10,000 chariots,
that'd be so
and they're all going head to head. Like there's just chariot charges.
Oh.
And incidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, I should say, is that this is the most recorded, this is the most detailed battle record we have of a battle that old is this battle. And I think because of just the novelty of it, I think historians were like, what the fuck? Like, imagine, like I said, this is like the atom bomb of the day. Like, imagine if nuclear war happened. Like, people would be writing about that.
Yeah.
Or, like, imagine the first, these, like, for that day, like, super weapons, these really novel, expensive, by the way, to have draft animals and supply them and to, build these things. It's like they're not easy to build either. It should be noted. They have to steam bend the wood and like do all this crazy shit, and to have 10,000 of them crashing into each other on a battlefield.
Yeah.
People, it's like a bunch of
It's like battleships just hitting each other.
Yeah, it's like
in
the
ocean.
That's what it made me think of.
Yeah.
Is it made me think of Jutland.
Yeah.
And the novelty of that is that it's it's the only time in history where modern battleships are blowing each other up.
Yeah.
And like that's what this is, and
It's
that's
like
why
the Battle of Kursk with all the tanks.
yeah, and that's why people are writing about it in this era, because it's just the wackiest thing that's ever happened. So yeah, that's my spiel basically about chariots.
Good job.
And the funny thing is that Alexander, chariots essentially they dominate the battlefield until about 1000 BC. Then they start to wane in importance because people figure out how to counter them, mostly by just cavalry tactics. Mobile cavalry, people learn how to ride horses well, and mobile armored cavalry is able to defeat a chariot every time. So at Gaugamela, which is like the final battle between the Persian Empire and Alexander, who's invading the Persian Empire, Darius III, the Persian emperor at that time, pulls like, a few hundred chariots or maybe 1,000 of these scythe chariots that were so scary 1,000 years ago, and orders a chariot charge at Alexander's line, and he basically just like steps aside and lets them go through. and then they go through, and he encircles them. They go through his battle line into his rear. He's then able to about face, circle them, and destroy them in like nothing.
Wow.
So Alexander figures out you can defeat a scythe chariot by just moving around it. And it took 1,000 years for anyone to figure that out.
Probably a lot of terrain defenses you could use too, by just like making something that the chariot can't roll over.
Yeah, well, that was the thing, is they really could only work on flat ground, which makes sense why they were so formidable in like the desert.
Yeah.
But, if they weren't really formidable anywhere else.
Right. If you've got a horse and the ground is like rocky, say, you're just like, oh, well, we're going to wreck these chariots.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is if you're riding a horse, you're able to go over more versatile terrain.
Right.
And the chariot is almost like a cop-out of learning how to ride horses correctly. It's like, it's a draft wagon.
Right.
It's animals pulling a wagon, but it's really fast and scary. But like, if you actually learn how to ride the animal, that horse can go over hills and jump over shit.
A Mongol horse archer will destroy a chariot because it takes you have twice as many twice as many people with bows, because you don't have half of them devoted to being drivers.
Yeah.
And B, you're probably a lot more mobile because you can turn on a dime a lot more easily, and a handful of other reasons.
I mean, so anyway, this whole thing starts with the Asian steppe people. It's worth noting those people are formidable right up till the Renaissance, basically. Like, the Mongols are always like exceptional in history because of their horse archers and their ability to ride.
It's crazy though that they never become world powers in the way that we like remember like civilized world powers, because all of their power or strength is derived by being
their military
out in the steppe. And so once they become city dwellers, then they lose all that power. They're like never good at being institutionalized.
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
like,
that's debatable.
at least that's the argument that I've heard, is just like that they would like cycle their archers through like going out into the wilderness essentially by doing like tours, and then you could live in the city, but you like kind of had to keep them fresh. But like being in the city was like the reason. I mean, they conquered city people because they were just so much tougher than city people, and then they became city people.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big... I mean, we're getting
way
off topic now.
yeah.
But I will just say, like, I think in the West, we have this stereotype of Mongols as barbarians, so we don't really think about all the amazing things their civilization did. Like, in a lot of ways, when they conquered China and controlled the Silk Road, there was this period called the Mongol Peace, where they were living in and controlling the cities, and they had a totally modern bureaucracy. They had a really efficient tax system, and like modern law enforcement along the Silk Road, so none of their merchants were getting robbed, and just like provided amnesty for poor people, and set up like orphanages, and like gave health care to people. Like, they were really kind of amazing and progressive in this way that we don't ever think about. Like, we think about them just camped on the steppe, but a lot of them were amazing, like Chinese bureaucrats, or went on to become that, and like created a really lasting empire. All because of the fucking composite bow, man.
Yeah.
Bows and horses.
Cool.
That's what it's all about.
What you got, Sean?
Oh,
Oh,
I looked at ancient Greek
Bull
stuff.
leaping.
Hell yeah.
bull leapers.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah.
That was the what they did for fun during that time.
Bulls?
They leap over bulls during.
Are you
Like a
saying
charging bull?
saying animal bull?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like in the 16 and 1700 BC years, the ancient Minoans and well, first of all, we got the ancient Minoan Empire, which is like in Crete, modern day Crete.
Okay. The island of Crete?
Yeah.
Huh.
And they were like real good, and they spread their culture everywhere and did the whole whatever they did good. And then they started to fall apart because someone either conquered them or just earthquakes. There's always earthquakes there. Like they're always getting fucked up
Mm-hmm.
with earthquakes and volcanoes.
Well, their palace was destroyed by a huge like tsunami basically.
Yeah.
That's where they think the myth of Atlantis came from. Is it
Yeah,
was
that
this,
shit's always happening.
this
there.
amazing advanced island civilization that gets fucked up by a big tornado, like a hurricane basically. Yeah, this huge wave. There was a big earthquake, and this huge wave destroyed the Mycenaean palace, the palace of the kings on Crete. Yeah,
You mean Minoan?
or Minoan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, those people had a lot of art in Knossos, which is like their main.
They had those
capital.
dolphin frescoes, right?
Yeah, they
Those
had all
famous-
sorts of shit.
Yeah.
They found
This is our
fresco
history
of
podcast.
of a
Yeah,
guy-
they had some shit. And,
a guy jumping over bulls,
yeah.
and he held on to its horns. So people were like, "Oh, well, that must mean that this was a sport," and they waited for the bull to come at him, and then he'd grab onto the horns and jump over it and doing tricks when it pushed him up. That's literally the
There's
description.
one carving that they've
That's a
extrapolated.
description of this. It is often interpreted as a description of a ritual performed in connection with bull worship. This ritual consists of an acrobatic leap over a bull. When the leaper grasps the bull's horns, the bull will violently jerk his neck backwards, giving the leaper the momentum necessary to perform somersaults and other acrobatic tricks or stunts.
They talk like the bull is a participant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, so are you fucking kidding me? Like, how? What the fuck?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they try to do that nowadays in like France because they're stupid, and they got a picture out here, guys just trying to jump over the fucking bull. He's not grabbing onto its horns because that's probably impossible.
Well, he's just
There's
low-level
probably-
bull leaper.
There's probably one fucker who could do it in ancient Greece, and then they're like, "Oh, get a fresco made of."
Yeah.
Or
Of Billy Bob
Yeah.
because he was such a good bull jumper.
He was like the Travis Pastrana of his generation.
or it was just a fucking picture and not a literal thing. It was probably a
Probably,
myth.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
the
no.
bull.
No,
the
no,
bull
no.
is the sacred animal of. There's some myth associated with the founding of human civilization on Crete. It's like somebody fucks a bull or something, or what animal?
Excuse me?
Yeah, no. What god? What god is a bull associated with? Is it Zeus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he fucks this chick as a bull.
Yeah, that's right.
But
Zeus
Is that how a
appeared.
Minotaur comes about?
no, but
No.
the Minotaur theme
No, that's
is
how
from Minoan.
Oh,
Empire.
Minotaur.
That's how the Minoans were born. The Minoans are children of Zeus, who comes to this like, maid in a glen as a cow and like rapes her, and that's.
It's just
there
a
you
bunch.
go.
There's just a bunch of assholes defending their bestiality,
Yeah.
being like, "No, that was Zeus.
No, that was it, man. That was the creation story.
I fucked that goat, but that was Hera. I
yeah,
swear."
yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is the time when all of those myths, most of them, were being formed.
Mm.
Like around the 1600 BCs. I mean, actually, this is older than what people think the Trojan War was, but the Trojan War has like 200 different dates from
Yeah.
200 different sources, so
Huh.
no one really knows. But what I know, this is what Sean knows, and Sean knows that Brad Pitt, there's no way that he had that armor.
Oh yeah, and
There's
Troy.
no way
And Troy.
when Achilles in this whenever because there's examples of
Yeah, Brad Pitt's armor in that movie is like galvanized steel. Like it's like black.
Yeah.
It's like there's no way.
it's all silly
Yeah.
because what they had then and there's armor from 1400 BC found in Manoa or Mycenae or wherever, and it's I think Mycenae, and it's like just a big old bucket, and it looks so dumb, and it's just good enough to wear. It's like just at the edge where you're like, no, I'm not gonna wear it. It's useless. It's just good enough where you're like, I'll wear it, and then you can't do anything in it.
I love when
And then it's like all right, well, so we have this idea of the Trojan War being like, oh, this is so cool, like all these people look so cool and they're doing all this stuff, and they were actually just in buckets, and they're like,
Just like
give back my queen, and then he's like, no, and you can't see their heads because they're just a big bucket, and then it's just like big bronze like shoulders,
like
and,
one level above just wearing a barrel and suspenders.
yeah, and it's like they all look like idiots,
Yeah.
and there's nothing good about it.
I love watching you get heated about armor.
Yeah, so someone's got to do it. Someone's got to point out this inaccuracy.
Yeah, someone's
and
got to
Troy
be the
movie.
vanguard. Well, yeah. No one else ever has pointed out how inaccurate that movie is.
It's about time
Yeah.
someone got to the real meat of the story.
This is gonna get us trending.
Yeah.
Finally, someone calls out.
Finally,
Troy.
it'll be a BuzzFeed article. Finally, someone had the courage to stand up to that movie made in 1998, starring Brad Pitt.
But yeah, this is the time when those myths were starting to be like, well, these stories became myths later on.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you think about it. I mean, we think of Alexander the Great as like really old, but then for him, this was over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So for him, it's like he had all these ideas of like, wow, the Iliad, and he had
Yeah.
the Iliad all the time, and he was reading it, idolizing it.
Mhm.
But it was just like a bunch of idiots in buckets. And
I remember in Dan Carlin's Persian one, whatever
Mhm.
that one's called.
Oh, and he talks about how old the world is.
Yeah, well, he's talking about
how old, and people
that-
know how old it is.
well, there's that city, and they've got this like the stele of Hammurabi, is in one of the cities, and it's just like he thinks that his culture is old. I forget who he's talking about, like, and then they get to this place, and it's just like, whoa, this thing is 2,000 years old. And like we're talking about a group of people that we think are old, but
Yeah.
they had this same group of people that were just as old as they are to us.
Yeah.
And Hammurabi is around the same time. I didn't really dig too much into him because I couldn't find anything that interesting. But Hammurabi, his grandson, is alive in 1619 BC.
Really?
King of the Babylonians.
Is that Nebuchadnezzar?
No, they all had very Arab-sounding names
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
remember. But yeah, Babylon had some kind of interesting things. But yeah, I only brought up Hammurabi because of
Just-
what you were talking about, Alexander finding these old things and be like, holy crap.
Well, there's a really interesting footnote I came across, which is that they believe you were saying about this is the time when all these myths sort of start coming about. Well, the priesthood of ancient Greece actually attributed at that time the Greek religion, or the whole kind of Greek philosophy or theology, I guess is a more acute way of saying that, to the Egyptian religion. And it's kind of theorized that there was like one guy, like call him like Egyptian Jesus, who like made his way up into the northern Mediterranean and established the Greek religion as a ancestor of the old Egyptian religion 48,000 years before 1615 BC.
Whoa. I didn't know
And
we
people were thinking about that way back then.
had 48,000?
48,000 I saw.
What? Wow,
They
that's
were-
like way older than my concept of like
The world.
because I thought like recorded history started 10,000 years ago.
Well, yeah, but I mean, these are people talking about oral stories and theology that is happening before written language. So recorded history is really a product of when writing became a priority for people. But before that, I mean, and that's what's interesting is
I was actually going to talk about writing.
oh, great.
Do that because that liaisons into mine really well. If that's
Perfect.
If that
Well, yeah, because during this time, this is when the ancient Greeks started to write.
Mhm.
It's called Linear A. That was the really nice word for a new language.
Linear A.
Yep.
Well, that's not what they called it. That's
do
what we
you
call it. How do you know?
And that was used by the Minoan Empire, and they deciphered it in like the 50s, and they found out that it was recording like resources and trading goods, real boring stuff. But then there's also some like religious cult related tablets, and then it was adopted by the Mycenaeans, and Linear B was used. Good old Linear B was way better. And then that was used for the same thing, and that's it. And
That's all I got.
Some interesting facts.
It's just reading Wikipedia now.
Yeah. Well, I've read this. Duh.
Here we go.
But I see certain words, and it brings back my memory.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the Dark Age. Because there was an ancient Greek Dark Age, which I didn't really understand when I used to read my Greek armor books.
Huh.
And it's like the Mycenaean Empire was during this time, it like just started in the 16 BC and then ended in like 1200 BC. And then after that was the Greek Dark Ages, where literally no one did anything, apparently, according to history. They were just like, there's no more things because the sea peoples destroyed the empire of the Mycenaeans, and now we're just waiting until Alexander the Great and the ancient Athenians.
Until Athens
and
becomes a
generally.
thing, basically.
So I thought that was weird.
Yeah.
It was like multiple dark ages.
Well, that's
of
why they
time.
call it the Dark Age, and it happened so long ago that they just don't know. They don't know what was going on. I mean,
the Minoans were like, we finally invented plumbing, and then they're like, oh, fuck them up. And then they're like, oh, no, it's the Dark Age.
yeah.
God doesn't want plumbing.
They push you back fucking 1,000 years.
So the way we know about the stories that I was looking at, tying into like the history of writing, the way we know about these like really ancient dynasties in China are because we have their oracle bones. Things weren't being written down on a lot of stuff, but the things that they were being written down, they were being carved into bull scapula and turtle shells, and they would like write down the events that were happening, and then they would do pyromancy on them.
Oh,
which
it's
was
like
just like
scrimshaw.
heating it up, and then an oracle would determine like the future based on the cracks that emerged after they had written like an event into this bone or shell. But there's a dark age after this point in time because they started writing it in ink, and the ink didn't survive in the way that the carving did. So we don't know as much about like a little bit more recent than this era, which is really bizarre. But these oracle bones, also called dragon bones, were being sold as a pharmaceutical for hundreds of years in China. And in 1899, like someone finally realized that this stuff probably said important things.
In 1899 AD?
AD. Yeah.
They were just eating their artifacts.
They were eating their
China.
history. We have no idea how much history
Hashtag
is lost
China.
Yeah.
because they were eating it as like a kind of medicine of some sort.
Yeah, like, you mix it in with the snake skin and the piss, and then you
Do you have a burnt owl?
Yeah.
and then you fucking
have any,
you drink it all day.
Yeah,
It's
you
like,
mix it in
oh.
with bird spit and put it in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they still do that stupid shit.
Yeah. Bird nest drink.
Yeah.
Like healthcare. What's that? I just go over to my local apothecary.
I've got
and-
rhino cum.
and eat this ancient scrimshaw, and then I feel better.
It's all the placebo effect. It's just like, oh, I'm just eating bone meal
Yeah.
from 3,000 years ago. That must do something.
Yeah. What does it say on there? I don't know.
I don't know. Fuck it. Grind it up.
Yeah.
Put it in a drink.
So But the things that we've learned about this era, 1600 BC era, right around there, is like the transition of the oldest dynasty that we know of, but we don't have any archaeological evidence of them. We only know about them from like oral histories and myth, and then this dynasty that becomes called the Shang dynasty. And the first king of the Shang dynasty is the King Tang of Shang, which I really liked.
I hate Chinese names so much. You never remember any of them ever.
You will remember King Tang of Shang.
It's because it's not your language,
got-
asshole. You know,
The Qin dynasty is next to the
just
Wu
as
dynasty.
as bad as like King
It's the Wu,
John,
the
King
Wu,
Henry. How many King Henrys were there?
Yeah,
King
but that's
Henry
different.
the Fourth, King Henry.
At least
the
they just
Ninth.
numbered it. That's way easier than being like, oh, well, that was the Wu, now it's the Tu, now it's the Boo and the Tu and the Moo and the. It's like, come on, just throw a number on it and just
Hashtag racist.
no. It's so hard. Oh, that's such a hard thing to say. You're racist. Fuck you.
I'm just kidding.
I know.
No, we never say anything racist on this show.
I can't believe we haven't picked any Bulgarian jokes yet.
Oh well, they're not around yet.
They aren't.
Thank God.
So let me see. So
Maybe they're just scratching out a meek existence in fucking Thrace,
hey, cheers to that.
farming rocks with their
Hey.
little rat hands. Here we go. We open the
little
floodgate.
rat hands. Wow, that was you were going like, okay, modest, real bad, real mean after that one.
They were scheming how to steal everyone else's gold.
All right, my turn. I'm taking back
The
to
Bulgarians.
I'm talking again.
All you had to say was Bulgarian.
Yeah, I know. So this guy,
And then they ruin your wall when they're moving their furniture out of your place.
Yeah.
So King Tang of Shang is born right around this era, and he's remembered as like the best guy ever because he took down who was remembered as a despot. This guy, King Ji of Z, whatever.
Stop.
And Ji is remembered as an asshole because he was just like the classic kind of despot of just essentially drinking his way through like the national fortune, and he and his wife were known alcoholics, and his wife
And then they became the richest people in the world.
Well, they
and
were,
like,
like-
all right.
his wife, they have like a very like Joker Harley Quinn-esque kind of thing going on. Because his wife is like, of all the things that are remembered from history, his wife is said to have ordered him to make a lake of wine. And this lake of wine is big enough to sail boats in, supposedly. It's so big.
That's so great.
And they have a drunken orgy in this lake, with just like thousands of people, I guess.
Oh my God.
And then she orders 3,000 men to drink the lake dry. And the history,
Dude, what in 1600 BC?
Yeah,
that's
and-
so what? We haven't lived up to that since then. We
Yeah,
fucked
why don't
up
we
for the
have a
last
lake of wine?
3,200 years.
That's some Roman emperor debauchery right there.
so she orders these
awesome.
guys to drink the lake dry. And so they like get down. It's like recorded that they like lean down like cattle, like coming down, like putting their face into the lake on the edge. They're like 3,000 men surrounding this lake, and they put their face down into the lake, trying to drink it dry.
That's nuts.
But they get so drunk that they just fall face first in it and all drown. And history remembers her as cackling, laughing at their deaths.
Just like us.
Yeah,
it must have been sake, right? Because they got rice.
yeah, that's what I
Rice wine?
imagine. Yeah.
A lake
That's
of
so
sake.
fucked up.
So
Hey, at least they had a good party before they died.
right. So the two of them are, I guess, just assholes, or fun if you want to think about it that way.
I just imagine. When you
Fun,
said the Joker and Harley Quinn, I pictured them dressed up as Chinese people in like a tower,
Yeah.
like watching people die
Yeah.
in like this lake of wine. That sounds fucking awesome.
So G then decides to go conquer this other king's area, but I guess that king had some like super hot daughters, and so he decides to dump Crazy Lady, who made him get a lake of wine, and then marries the two of his daughters, and it's
Both?
He marries both of them.
That's so
And it's
great.
And
This
the
guy's
part that
awesome.
struck me as funny was that he renamed them their first names when he married them. So it's just like, "Yep, you're Cindy now," which I just thought was funny.
Wait, what did he
that's
do?
So
He-
awesome.
He renamed them when he married them.
You're like, all right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we still kind of do when we marry people.
But I
guess.
think it would have been. I don't think it would have been mentioned if it was like in the traditional manner of like getting a new last name. I think
Yeah.
it was like bizarre that he like just changed their name for his own fucking will.
I will call you Lulu.
And now your favorite color is blue.
Yeah. So King Tang of Shang organizes like this kind of like
Yellow Turban Rebellion.
well,
what am I
it's
saying?
actually this is in the Yellow River in pretty much the same area as my story from 919 when flamethrowers were invented, which is just across from the Korean Peninsula. It's like northernish China. And it was one of the first times where this concept that was used for like thousands of years later, called the Mandate of Heaven, which is very similar.
I was just gonna interject about that, but I'm glad.
It's very similar to the Divine Right of Kings that was used in Europe, but it's different in that the king doesn't have isn't guaranteed rule by God. It's simply just that God like will, or like that they don't have God, they have like the heavens. I think they talk about it slightly differently, and that the heavens have decided that like you should be king. But that could be called into question if there was pretty much anything that went wrong, whether it was famine or it was a flood or it was a storm.
Well,
Kings got replaced really easily when a big storm or an earthquake happened.
Yeah.
Which was really bizarre.
Well, it's almost democratic in a way, because it's very much like up to how happy the people are.
Yeah.
And obviously when they saw this guy, drowning 3,000 people in an exorbitant lake of sake, they were like, all right, well, the gods probably don't like him.
Yeah.
So whoever's coming up next has the mandate of heaven, like, because they fucked up. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just looked at that in school, and my history teacher not my history teacher, but the history teacher that I work with did a really interesting exercise about U.S. presidents and whether or not they have in recent history, and whether or not they had the mandate of heaven, which was just kind of a cool like critical thinking exercise of like, does Donald Trump have the mandate of heaven, or is he losing it, or does he still have and what's interesting about it is discussing whether or not a contemporary politician can claim the mandate of heaven oddly aligns very closely with like, are they popular, or like, are they doing a good job,
Right.
like in a democratic sense.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of this interesting primitive democracy.
Yeah, it seemed to be at least some level of a stopgate against totalitarianism.
Yeah, right.
In the way that Europe didn't have, where it's just like, well, the king's awful, but he's our blessed king.
Yeah, right.
Whereas this, it was just like, oh, there was an earthquake. Fuck this guy.
Yeah.
But that's all I got.
You couldn't do anything about the earthquake.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
So, shit. I didn't come prepared enough to get our number generator.
Is that it?
That's
the
all
end of
I
the-
have.
That's
yeah.
the end of the show?
That's all I had.
Does
What the
anybody
hell
have
can
any-
we talk about during 1619 BC? Oh,
no one
I
else
got
has
one
anything
more.
to add?
I got a
All
thing
right,
to add.
Go.
During this time, this is when people discovered the first instance of rubber balls.
Oh, shit.
They found rubber balls dated
Where?
from this time in fucking India or
So
something.
rubber trees.
Yeah,
So people figured out how to process rubber and make balls.
Apparently.
That's wild.
they're just like,
Do you know what they were doing with them?
no.
Huh.
I mean, how could
Bouncing
you?
them around.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
unless there was literally next to like a tablet like carved in stone.
Right. This is what this
It's
is
like-
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like locked in an urn of some sort.
Yeah.
Really, just really out there. Not a whole lot of things
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about this period, and it actually maybe circles back around quite neatly to the beginning of the show, which is like, I can't pull the specific quote in my head, but Robin Lane Fox, the guy who did like the most famous autobiography of Alexander the Great, has a great line about technology, and again, can't recall these specifics, but it basically says something which is like, you know, invention never comes before human imperative, which is to say, like, you know, when we look at the past,
You're essentially saying necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
the classic
yeah.
phrase.
Oh, I didn't even know that phrase. But, so he says it a little bit differently, and that really registered with me. Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention is a neater way to say that. We know what we're doing here. We do.
Here's my motto of 1619
Here you
BC.
go. Yeah.
Let's just do things that are a little bit better than before, but they're still shitty.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting that, like, you know, this is a time when there's you know, like you were saying before, it's interesting, like with written language, it was like people used it to keep track of their harvests, you know, and like it was seen as this utility. Like, no one was writing prose in 1619 BC. No one was writing poetry, really. So, and even written language is like we talked about earlier, the human brain hasn't changed much since the beginning of, you know, history as we know it. So it's like people were just making do with what they thought was important, and there really wasn't a need for, say, knowing how to ride a horse or having a chariot until the chariot showed up, and then you're like, oh fuck, I have to respond to that and figure out what that is. So it's just interesting that it's like the world is just so different, and it's always changing, and you know, you can't look back on people from this time as being like ignorant, as I think we sometimes have a bias or an implicit tendency to do, because it's just like, well, they just had different, you know, priorities.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, my takeaway from learning about this era is just how random the information that we have about the world is. I mean, the fact that we know about this Chinese empire because they carved into bone skulls to try to predict the future, and that later on
random,
that they used ink, and so we just don't have it. Like, because in their contemporary time, they may have been writing everything down on paper, and then the paper disintegrated, and no one ever bothered to write it to save it, because it was just written on new paper, and they're like, fuck it. Like,
Bad librarians in the BC.
yeah, I mean, like, we live in a world in which we have permanence of information, and they lived in a world where it was like really hard to save, I think, anything. And we're thinking about time so long ago that, like, we're like, oh, if it made it from 1600 BC to 1200 BC, that doesn't seem that long.
That's 400 years.
But that's 400 years that it would have had to make it.
Yeah.
And that's a huge amount of time.
That's crazy. Think of all the stuff. Think of all the ideas that came and went in 400 years.
Right.
You know, and it's just crazy how long time was. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, well, it's 1619 BC. That's like not that far off from like Rome, but it's 1500 years.
It's a long
That's
way.
the amount of
Yeah.
time from now and Rome.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just like, okay, this is significantly longer
Right.
than I can really wrap my head around.
Right.
To really picture the world, I struggle. I think all I do is picture I picture Dynasty Warriors really still, which is like
Which is not even
close. Yeah. And with the Greeks, I picture, you know,
Troy.
I guess.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah, I don't know.
Ancient aliens. Aliens built everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I picture.
Everything that we don't have information for, aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
ready?
Do
We
you have
ready?
the generator?
I got it.
All right.
3, 2, 1. 1743.
Oh, thank God.
BC or AD?
80.
AD.
Thank Christ. That's going to be way easier.
1743.
There's going to be so much information.
Yeah, I'm excited. Finally, something like
Easy to research.
We've been deep in history for
We-
the last few.
We've been through hell. What was so? What did we started with? What was our 1872 was
right?
Easy.
But we picked that one intentionally.
Yeah.
We did 919.
That was hard.
We did 1339.
Pretty hard.
Which we thought was old at the time.
Until we went 2,000 years back from that.
And then we did 361. So episode 6 will be 1743. All right, everyone. Signing out. Bye-bye. Thanks for being here. Follow us on everything. Follow us on YouTube. That's where you are obviously seeing here.
We're obviously know what we're doing here. So
on the iTunes,
give us a shot.
Podcast
go to your arm.
thing.
Give us a shot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Please send money.
What'd you do to your arm?